right, thanks, Rick. Our next speaker is HP Puckett. He's a retired naval officer, history major, and firearms enthusiast. HB will present on the Kentucky and what I actually mistakenly called the Pennsylvania rifle this morning when we were standing there. Thanks, HB. Come on up.
I actually brought a specimen of each one of the firearms I want to talk about, but I want to point out that either one of them are in operable condition. When we're done, you're welcome to come up and grab a whole one, regardless of its inoperability. Please always keep it pointed in the same direction. I'll just lay it up against the wall here for a second. And I have pictures of them on this, so I don't have to be picking them up all the time.
Okay.
All right.
Right arrow to move forward.
All right, thanks. Hi, everybody. And excellent job, Rick, and all you folks. I'm looking forward to meeting as many people. Okay, I know that Danny talked a little bit about the plains rifle. I'm going to talk about that, but first I want to talk about its ancestor, the Kentucky rifle. And there's a lot of discussion about, well, first of all, these are firearms that you might have typically found among the earlier people in this part of the country, trappers, traders, travelers, and some of the early settlers. All right, so the ancestor of the plains rifle, which we'll talk about in a minute, it's commonly called the Kentucky rifle. Now, I'll tell you that most of the early ones, and most of the ones were built and originated by German gun makers in Pennsylvania. So in recent years, people have said, hey, you got to call it the Pennsylvania rifle. It's a Pennsylvania rifle. Well, that's absolutely true. So a generic name for it has become the American long rifle, because that's basically what it is, and it's an American, not a purely American design. The ancestor of this rifle was the Jaeger rifle. The German rifle makers came over, gun makers came over, settlers came over, and a lot of them settled, as we know, in Pennsylvania and the upper Midwest. And so those gun makers started making their Jaeger rifles, spelled J-A-E-G-E-R, I think I'm pronouncing it. Am I pronouncing it right, Jaeger? Okay. Anyway, well, the Jaeger rifle is really very much like what our plains rifle is. So there was an advancement for one reason, and then the design returned to the plains rifle, which is very much like a Jaeger rifle. We'll talk about that. So they came over from Germany and they were building guns, and they realized, first of all, powder was scarce and expensive. Lead was scarce and expensive when they first got over here. And we didn't have, other than eastern elk, there wasn't a lot of giant game in the eastern United States. There was no reason to have a large caliber. So, or few reasons to have a large caliber. So some of the changes that they made was they went to a smaller bore, which conserved both lead and powder, okay? And with that, you wanted to have a longer bore for accuracy, but also they learned that if you burned all the powder, you got more velocity out of the weapon. So even with a smaller caliber, you could get a lot of power in your shot because you had higher velocities. Some of these guns fired up close to 2,000 feet per second, which was pretty doggone fast for a bullet back then. It became a distinct design basically around 1750. After the Battle of New Orleans, and I don't know the name of the song, but there was a famous song that came out because the Battle of New Orleans was a huge turning point in American history. It put us on the world stage, really. And I don't know the song, but they talked about Andy Jackson and his Kentucky Rifleman, even though as a Tennessean, I think it should have called it. But because of that, it became called colloquially as a Kentucky rifle instead of a Pennsylvania rifle. And the Pennsylvanians don't like that, but it's kind of stuck. I would, of course, being from Tennessee, I'd call it a Tennessee rifle. So it was built, like I said, until the late 1800s, actually. It was actually built in Appalachia, but built in the Ohio River Valley. Talked about the bore. A wide range of game. You could shoot, turkey with it. You could shoot smaller birds if you didn't use too much powder and didn't blast it to smithereens, but you could use it against anything from squirrels all the way up to black bear. I'm sure, it killed a lot of deer, and I'm sure it probably killed a few eastern elk, but it may have taken more than one shot. Around 1830, or before 1830, the percussion cap came out, and you've seen pictures of the flintlock and the percussion cap lock. Around 1930, that pretty much most manufacturers, your gun makers, whether they were small time or big time, stopped making cap locks and started making flintlocks, although some did linger on. So it transitioned to cap lock around 1830. Many surviving examples are finely carved, engraved. They had ornate patch boxes. You can see the inlay along the forend, and almost all of them had the full-length wooden stock. This is an example of a fairly fine Kentucky rifle. And most of the pictures that you see from the surviving examples are fancy with the big ornate brass patch box and inlay and nice carving and engraving and all this sort of stuff. Well, sort of like old houses or old automobiles, the ones that survive are the really nice ones, right? The ones that were discarded and junked over the years are gone. Okay, and so that's why so many of the photographs you see of Kentucky rifles, and to some degree plains rifles, are fine, finely made rifles. But the fact is, most of them were, I wouldn't say crudely made, but very, very, very plain. And the one that I'll show you here in a minute is one of those very plain rifles. Some people call them a blacksmith rifle. You may correct me, but I think a lot of blacksmiths that weren't really gun makers would buy barrels and locks and then build the rest of the gun themselves. But a lot of, mainline rifle makers would make a base model, like an entry level, 64 Ford Falcon with a 4-cylinder and manual windows and whatever. That's kind of what this rifle is. So there's a picture of it with a period powder flask, and that's this weapon here. One of the things I want to point out, there's no way to really date this rifle. There are no markings on it in any way, but there are some ways to date it. One of the fact that it was originally a flintlock, so it's probably around or before 1830. It could be well before 1830 that this rifle was made, and many of the surviving old Kentucky and Pennsylvania rifles were actually used in, if you've ever read the book called The Dark and Bloody Ground, I highly recommend it. It's all about the Indian fights in the Ohio River Valley. Fascinating book. There weren't many people that owned firearms out there that didn't have to use them in an Indian fight at one time or another. So that rifle may have some interesting stories to tell. But you'll notice the longer flintlock, there's a frizzen here that had a frizzen spring in that, so that flintlock came all the way up to about here. And if you look closely at this or examine the firearm, you'll see that there's been a patch of walnut. This is a walnut stock that's been carved and placed into there to take the space between where the flintlock lock was much longer, and the other side of the rifle has a minor change too from changing that to a flintlock. No way to know anything about this rifle. It's got a 46-inch barrel, which is pretty long by any measure, and it's 62 feet overall length, so it's up to here. If you come pick it up, it's a Hoss, about 36 caliber the way and it's a hexagonal rifling. It's pretty distinct, and it measures to me about 36 caliber. Okay, both an ancestor and a descendant of the Kentucky rifle is the plains rifle. You can see a lot of similarities. Okay, it's got a hexagonal barrel. This particular one, that old, the next one I'll show you, you can see the curved butt plate. It was very popular to have that, and a lot of old Kentucky rifles did too, to have that little piece behind the trigger guard that gave you a little bit more of a pistol grip. So it descended from the Kentucky rifle in the early 1800s. Out west, you have bigger game. We talked about the trappers and stuff, horseback, and Donovan talked about the Indians shortened rifles so that they could handle them on horseback. Well, the same thing with this one. So for those reasons, for horseback carry and for a larger bore, they shortened the barrel and made it bigger so you can have bigger, a bigger bore and more powerful for larger game. So many of them had from flat to flat on the octagonal barrel was over an inch. This particular one that I have measures exactly an inch. So it's still a pretty heavy barrel. It's fun to hold. We talked about the Hawken brothers, Danny did talk about the Hawken brothers in St. Louis. They built a whole bunch of high quality rifles. Other makers did. They're by far the most famous. Where the Plains rifle is, basically say, well, that's a Hawken rifle, whether it's a Hawken or not. It's kind of like, I'm from Tennessee. If you're drinking a Coke, that could be anything from a 7-Up to a root beer to a Dr. Pepper, or whatever. It's called a Hawken. Again, effective for larger game, elk, bison, grizzly. Around 1830, again, like the Kentucky rifle that transitioned to a cap lock. But as we've talked about the evolution of firearms, when breech loaders became popular, it became largely obsolete. But a lot of people today use it like, some people do for fun. The one that I have, first of all, let me point out that both of these rifles came with my family to Wyoming on the Oregon Trail. Let me translate that. My wife and I drove them out from Tennessee on Interstate 80. But it's still true. Okay. This is likely a Tennessee rifle. As mentioned on a previous slide, I have read that a number of the makers of the Plains rifles, Tennessee became a place that they used iron from Alabama, and they used expertise from Appalachian, Ohio River. So there were a lot of gun makers in Tennessee, and they made a lot of Plains rifles to be shipped out west in Tennessee. And this, my dad got this in Tennessee many years ago. So it's likely a Tennessee rifle. Again, date maker unknown. The barrel, so we talked about that Kentucky rifle's got a 46-inch barrel. This has about a 38-inch barrel. It's thicker. And it measures to me about 58 caliber. I can't detect any rifling in the gun. A lot of them just were used so much, and this gun's been used a lot. We're kind of shot out, and some people would bore them out and make them smooth bores, and with a smooth bore made out of a heavy barrel rifle, you wouldn't want to use it to hunt birds because you can't really swing it around very quickly if you need to. But a lot of them, when they were shot out, rather than buy a new gun, they would make them a round smooth bore, and they could shoot either a ball or a shot out of it. So it could have been used as a fowling piece. It could have just been used as a smooth bore. If in fact the rifling is gone, I can't detect any, but I haven't put a bore scope down in there, so I don't know. And it measures 58 caliber. That's it. You get questions about those? Yes, sir.
We have an important event in 2 weeks. How's that going to come out?
Oh. Okay. Where's my hat? I didn't know. He wore his Wyoming shirt. I wore my Tulsa hat. Tulsa is going to come up and beat Wyoming in a couple weeks. So and we're going to be at the game together. Anyway, you're welcome when we're done to come up and heft those. Try not to cock either one of them. The hardware may fall out of the Kentucky rifle, but you're welcome to pick them up and hold them. And it's an interesting experience if you've never held one of them. That's all I got. Any questions? All right, appreciate it. Thanks.